Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Paleo Post podcast with me, your host, Seth Chuggy, and your co-host, Dr. George Nash. We are here to bring you so much paleo fun and excitement, and we are changing things up this episode, trying to bring you guys in to be more involved, more excited, and let you guys really in on the fun. You're going to see our faces this episode. We're just gonna have a lot of fun here, and what is more fun, George, than a playful competition where you can win prizes? I mean, that sounds pretty fun to me.
Well, as you know, Seth, points mean prizes.
Ooh.
And in the words of Frank Zappa, I love audience participation. So I was listening to the radio this week, as I do when I'm driving to work or whatever. And there was a very, very interesting interview with the new director, or the director who's directing the new the Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, which is out in the UK in May. And I remember and again, some of you may get a guess of how old I am, but I remember the first film of the Planet of the Apes with Charlton Heston, and then there was a television series which was made in the US, but we saw it over here in the 1970s. And really, in many respects, I was thinking about the idea that, well, we've got all these names, all these fantastic Latin names for people like us: Homo sapiens sapiens, Homo naledi, Homo neanderthalis, etc., etc. I thought what would be a really good idea is to think about an idea for the apes that are going to inhabit the earth, and where we are the slaves to the apes in 300 or 400 years' time. And I thought of the idea of what would we call them scientifically. So I sort of got my Latin head on, and I thought of the idea of Homo simii ferretaris, which is basically modern ape. So that's just an idea over a beer. So what might be an idea is for our listeners to maybe write in or email us with an idea what they would call these new apes that are going to take over the planet, have the kingdom of the planet of the apes, and we are their slaves. What they're going to be called scientifically, that is.
And I think that is a great idea. We're going to figure out the details, and I will post those around our social media so we can get you guys to participate. We might, I'm even thinking, have different categories because, in the movies, the gorillas have evolved, the orangutans have evolved, and the chimps have evolved. So maybe we'll even host 3 different, names for the apes, and I'll come up with some cool prizes because we do have some cool partnerships, like maybe some prizes from the Leakey Foundation or some other things I have laying around. Who knows? Maybe I'll get some 3D printed skulls that I can pass around. Who knows? Maybe I could even get a 3D printed skull of one of these future apes. I do know people. So keep your minds open, because if you come up with something really interesting, you might win something really cool. But moving on from that, which again, I think, the more that we can involve you guys in what we're doing, the more fun you have. And the more fun you have, I've learned in my career as an educator so far, is you retain the knowledge that you learn. If you're not having fun, the knowledge kind of bounces off of you. You don't absorb it. You don't retain it. You even possibly form some sort of resentment towards it. But if you're having fun, you're excited. I mean, you hear George and I talking to paleoanthropology, anthropology, and rock art. You can hear the excitement in our voices. Everything that we learn, and I feel like, I could sit here with George and we could literally talk for hours about any topic within this field, and it just goes on because we love it so much, and we want you guys to feel that love, and we want you to participate. So for this episode, we're going to bring that excitement to you, and we're going to have George start off with, I think, George, why don't we start off with your updates on your work? Because
Yeah.
you're an active archaeologist, you're an anthropologist in the field, you do research on a weekly, if not daily basis.
Yeah, coincidentally, and again, it seems to be on our weekly sort of turnaround that there's something going on in my life in terms of paleoanthropology and rock art, of course. And I will just tell listeners and viewers, if you can see my ugly mug, that I don't just do rock art. I do other things as well. I do a lot of human remains, and again, that's another story. But last week, I had the pleasure and the honour to be working in a site in Creswell Crags. And for those of you who don't know what Creswell Crags is, it's a large gorge, limestone gorge, which is on the Nottinghamshire Derbyshire border. This is up in the northern Midlands of England, and it's really quite interesting because the in terms of the Devensian ice sheet, which is really the last glaciation, or the Fennoscandian ice sheet, which came from Scandinavia, came down from about 60 to 70,000, but really hit the British Isles around about 30 to 40,000 years ago. And it came as far south as Wales, to South Wales, that is, but also it just has this very, very strange sort of knack of it only penetrated the northern Midlands. It didn't come right down to sort of towards Oxford or Bristol. The ice margin was really over this area called Creswell. And I dare say that if you were standing on the top of the gorge, it's called Creswell Crags. It's actually a geological gorge. If you stood on the top of the gorge looking north, you would see that pencil line of ice, of maybe 2 kilometres of ice standing in front of you. So it would have been very, very cold. And again, I've mentioned this before, but maybe minus 15, minus 10 degrees centigrade in the summer months. It would have attracted large megafauna such as mammoth, elk, reindeer, bison, horse, etc., plus all the small mammals as well. So, although it was inviting for those animals, it was also perishingly cold. And anyway, to cut a long story short, the gorge became a sort of a playground for the very rich in the 18th century, and it was turned into a sort of like a sort of leisure park. And they decided to flood the central part of the gorge. And if you go there today, there's a beautiful lake, but before the 18th century, it would have been just a small river running through the gorge, but it's now been dammed at one end, and the water's obviously the water levels have risen to create this lovely artificial lake. And it was, again, as I said to you before, it's the playground for the landed gentry. Anyway, moving forward to the late 19th century, well, actually to around about the 1860s, 1850s, 1860s onwards, it starts to become an interesting place for archaeologists to excavate, because within the gorge are around about 20 caves and rock shelters and overhangs, and all of them have yielded some form of archaeology. And most of it's mainly prehistoric. And in certain caves, such as Pinhole Cave, Robin Hood's Cave, Church Hole Cave, to name but a few, there has been a lot of artifacts and archaeology occurring between, say, about 1850, 1860 to about 1920, 1930. And this is at a time when gentlemen archaeologists, and I say gentlemen, there were no gentlewomen, unfortunately, but gentlemen archaeologists would come in with their labourers, and they would just basically hoik out, that's basically remove every bit of stratigraphy out of each cave and create these massive big spoil heaps. And the artifacts were extracted from the bulk that was coming out, and they would end up in museums. However, the recording of those artifacts is sometimes very, very suspect. And again, these archaeologists, people like Boyd Dawkins, for example, who was a very eminent archaeologist at the time, he was basically a product of his time. He didn't have the scientific equipment, technology, the know-how, how to understand stratigraphy. So at the end of the day, there were very, very rudimental reports made by one man. And this is one thing that really annoys me. And I dare say people who are listening to this hopefully can appreciate this. But I am always very, very careful, and I have been in my career, to make sure I get the opinions of everybody who is digging, especially those people who are actually digging the holes. And the one thing that Boyd Dawkins and all the other archaeologists did at that point was to create a personal notebook. And again, this is a problem, because if you've got a personal notebook, it's your interpretation and nobody else's.
Right.
And I think my argument is that when you've got somebody who's digging that hole, they are going to know that hole more intimately than the director. And therefore, you should always seek the opinion of that person.
Right.
So, Boyd Dawkins did the excavations along with others. People like Mello was another guy who dug church hole. A guy called Heath looked at the human remains and the animal remains, etc., etc. So there was, a little bit of science going on there, but it wasn't the sort of rigor that we see today in modern archaeology. But nonetheless, they were a product of their time, and also, more importantly, their discoveries are very, very important to understanding the history of the archaeology. Not so much the history of the development of the site, but the history of the archaeology of the site. So I would argue that sometimes the archaeological history is as important as the archaeology itself. So how it was dug, why it was dug, what was missed, what wasn't missed, etc., etc. So that's very, very important. Anyway, in 2003, an Anglo-Spanish team came specifically to look at 3 or 4 caves within the gorge with an idea of looking for rock art. And luckily for the Anglo-Spanish team, they had 2 very experienced Spanish rock art specialists. One guy called Sergio Repol, and Sergio discovered, I think, in one of the caves, the first bit of rock art, and that was really the starting point of a major discovery. And in one cave, Church Hole Cave, they discovered a lot of animals engraved, only engravings, and the engravings included a bison, a very, very nice side view or side-on view of a bison, a red deer, which they initially thought was an ibex, but as we all know, that ibex didn't come that far north during the Ice Age, and therefore it was then looked at a little bit more carefully, and they discovered, rather than seeing the horns of an ibex, they actually saw the antlers of an ibex. Antlers of a red deer, and so it was interpreted then as a red deer. So they found around about 120 potential markings, 127, I think, in total, but then whittled it down to around about 16 or 17 actual engravings, which they could actually call, or potentially call, Upper Paleolithic in date. And they were also very, very fortunate that 3 or 4 of the images, engravings that they found, were overlain by calcite flow. So therefore, you could then call in a specialist to do uranium thorium dating. And they called in Alistair Pike and his team from Southampton University, and they got the earliest dates of rock art in the British Isles, or actually the first proper Upper Paleolithic static art in the British Isles, but also the earliest dates was they made the first discoveries. And in 2003, I think it was published in 2005 and 2007, they had dates of around about between 12,500 and 13,500 BC, so 15,000 BP before present. So very, very exciting stuff. The calcite dating came from a series of vertical marks, which was underneath the red deer and the bison. The red deer and the bison were quite close together, and I forget exactly where the actual lines were, but there was a really nice calcite flow over that. And there was also a very interesting panel halfway into the cave. Now, the cave is 16 meters long, and from the entrance right to the very end. And about the first 40 meters is pretty straightforward. However, what was really exciting was one thing I noticed when I was there, and I was there in 2009, because I did a BBC program on rock art, and I used Creswell Crags as one of my places to focus on. And what I noticed was that the original floor level was quite high up, maybe a meter high than it is today. And that would have meant, that if you were going into that cave for the first time during the Upper Paleolithic, you would have to crawl through, maybe on your hands and knees, at least on your hands and knees, first of all to make your carvings, but also to progress through right to the very end of the cave. And also you have to encounter a sump. Now, if any of you do caving, you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, I do not know what you're talking about.
Right. Well, a sump is basically a rock overhang in the cave where you have to crawl either on your belly or you have to face upwards in order to curve your body around the rock which is above you. And sometimes it's very, very difficult. And I've been caught out a couple of times in my career in caves where there's been quite a low sump. Now, the sump in Churchill is not too bad. It's pretty easy to crawl through. But this is now, but probably during the Paleolithic, you would have to crawl on your belly either or on your back in order to navigate your way through that particular cave system. And what is interesting is that although they've discovered art at the entrance of the cave, where the grill is, where the steel grill is, and halfway through the cave system at 40 meters from the grill, there's two things we need to take into consideration. First of all, I can't believe for 1 minute that the art would have been visible during the Paleolithic, and therefore, because it's limestone, it's more than likely that the cave entrance would have been 4 to 5, maybe even more meters further forward than it is today. And because of erosion, because of freeze-thaw processing, because of water, because of all sorts. And I don't believe for 1 minute that when you were standing outside the cave looking in, that you would have seen the rock art, in particular the red deer. And so it's more than likely, because of erosion, because of solid fluxion, and because of freeze-thaw, weathering, water percolation, that the cave entrance would have been maybe 4 or 5 meters further forwards than it is today. And more importantly, what is also interesting is that the cave, because of the way the cave floor you can clearly see in the sections, you can see that it would have been very, very difficult, first of all, to navigate into the cave, and also to try and carve a red deer. There was also a very interesting wild fowl there as well. I'm not quite sure what it's been interpreted as, right, but it's like a crane or a hornbill, some form of bird. But again, there's always that reinterpretation that needs to follow later on. Anyway, as you go into the cave system, 40 meters in, there's a very interesting panel on the western wall. And what you've got there are a series of lines which make up probably a wild fowl, probably something like a goose or some form of duck, and also a long-necked animal, which is probably a cervid, maybe a red deer with long or large floppy ears. It was originally interpreted by one of the people working who made the discovery as naked ladies, which obviously had a big headline around the world because everybody loves a naked lady engraved on a wall, don't they? But it clearly wasn't. And when I got there, I was trying to sort of stand on my head, thinking, what the hell is that then? No naked ladies there. It more looked like, the neck and the head of a wild goose, and the neck and the head of a red deer. So that's what it's been reinterpreted as, which I'm pleased, thank goodness. Anyway, further on, you go under the sump, and then you come to some really interesting graffiti. And the interesting thing is that the cave was excavated in 1875 by Mello, initially by a guy called Mello, and but there's graffiti in there of 1860. So 15 years previously, people were crawling into that cave. And again, another interesting little sort of sub-story about this is that when the red deer was discovered in 2003 by the Anglo-Spanish team, and it's a side-on red deer with the antlers. It's very difficult to see the antlers, so I see how they could easily make a mistake. But somebody in 1943, so this is 60 odd years before the scientific discovery of that red deer, a caver got into that cave and drew a long beard, about half meter long. He initialed it and dated it. So it's quite clear that the cave was being frequented by archaeologists, by people who just wanted to go into the cave, and also cavers. And they left their mark, quite rightly so. And so what you've got in certain areas of the cave, especially the entrance and right at the back, is lots of modern graffiti. And again, this interests me because what you've got there are names and dates, and you can start to picture some sort of historical stratigraphy about who's going in there over the last 150 odd years, or actually a bit more than that, the last 170 odd years. And what's been really interesting is what I've been working in. Now, my project, what started actually in 2021 at the three caves, so that's Pinhole, Robin Hood's, and Churchill. And really, in many respects, the work that I'm doing at the moment is really concentrating on Churchill Cave itself. And what my rationale for my part of the project was, we've got engraved art, but there surely could be, I'm saying surely, there could be actually painted art as well. Have we looked? Now, I do know that the Anglo-Spanish team, or members of the Anglo-Spanish team, went into that cave, I think, after the discovery in 2003, and started to look around for potential painted rock art and didn't find it. We know this because it's never been published. So I went in there in 2021, just before COVID, I think. And I had, yes, it was before COVID. And I explored, and what I did was, which was stupid of me, and again, I'm happy to admit my mistakes. I went in there with a camera, I went click, 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 click. And because we didn't have, and this is a really strange story, because we didn't have a proper digital plan of the cave, all we had was a plan made by Mello in 1877, which is no use to anybody really. There was a massive problem, and so I went in the cave quite merrily, click, 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 click. Got some really wonderful stuff coming up, but then I had to go back in 2024 last week and try and relocate the images I took. And so I had to print off the photographs as raw images without the de-stretch. And again, I'll come to the de-stretch in a minute, and locate them. And luckily, thank goodness for my career, I give myself a really bad name, but I managed to relocate all the photographs I took because I did them in sequence. So I started at the entrance, worked down the eastern wall, got to the bottom, and then came up and worked up the western wall. So I could roughly work out where they were. Anyway, what I've discovered is around about 8 panels, which has the potential, and I say the potential for painted rock art. Now, obviously, the big problem is, first, the two big issues are, first of all, is it applied hematite, i.e. made by human agency, or is it secreted hematite? Now, again, for those of you who know or understand limestone caves, one thing you get in there, in a lot of caves around the world, is hematite. So it's very difficult to work out what is actually applied hematite by human agency or secreted hematite. And so when I got there, I had to be very, very careful. I had to disregard a hell of a lot of stuff that looked like painted rock art, but it wasn't. So I whittled it down to around about 8 panels, and I still use the word in my reports as potential. I don't say it is, it's potential. But there is one site which is absolutely cracking, one panel which is absolutely cracking. And I'll come to that in a minute. So what I've done is I've taken a series of raw images of all the rock walls obviously above the floor level, and it's not. There's only about between half meter and a meter of wall to look at on either side, and then I put them through D-Stretch. And again, for those viewers, listeners who don't know what D-Stretch is, it's a color algorithm which was introduced by a guy called John Hansson, sorry, who used to work for NASA. And in 1995, he decided to use it because his hobby was prehistoric painted rock art. He was using it in the US, and the original use for D-Stretch was to identify the different color spectrums when looking at satellite imagery. So basically, they were looking for drugs, and in particular, poppy fields. So the algorithm picks out reds, yellows, and blacks. And guess what? Reds, yellows, and blacks are the popular colors or pigments used in prehistoric art. So it's an ideal companion for not just for looking for drug fields, but also looking for rock art. Ironic, isn't it? Anyway, I managed to put all the images through D-Stretch. I whittled out 8 panels, and what was really interesting that 3 of those panels, which includes the red deer, the bison, and the naked ladies, or the two-headed, the wildfowl and the red deer, all have painted imagery inside, which I believe is potentially applied paint or pigment to the wall. And the reason why I say this is because with the bison, the red line or the engraved line, the paint comes up to the red line, up to the engraved line, but doesn't go beyond it. So quite clearly, the artist is either following the red line of the hematite and then making his or her engraving of the bison, and in particular the neck area and the legs of the bison, and or he or she is painting applied hematite inside the engraved lines of the animal. So that's one. And then with the red deer, which is the closest to the entrance, you've got a series of geometric forms inside. And again, I say potentially. This is the most important thing. Potentially, I need to look in greater detail to confirm that. And then the weird one is the panel which is 40 meters inside the cave on the west wall, and you've got there the neck, the long neck of the wild fowl, the goose or the duck, and the long neck of the red deer, and then you've got beneath that is a series of finger dots and a curvilinear painting design. Don't know what it is. It could be the backside of a larger animal. But again, I've got to look at that at some point and reassess what might be going on there. So those are the 3 panels that I'm very, very excited about. Also, I found within one other cave is a triangle, which could be a pubic triangle, which is, again, painted. You can't see it with the naked eye. And again, just for the sake of this this podcast, is that all the imagery that I've teased out from the photography is paint that you can't see. It's faded into the limestone, so it's very, very difficult to see. However, there's one absolutely cracking panel which is on the eastern wall, and as you crawl into the cave and under the sump, right to the back of the cave itself, on the left hand side or on the eastern wall, you've got 2 circles which you can see with the naked eye just about. And this is made from really thick pasted hematite, which has been applied to the wall. Now, the one thing that is, so it's a little bit frustrating is that that all the panels I've got, only one or two have the potential for dating, which because they have a calcite flow over them. So, in many respects, I have to assume that they are contemporary with the engravings, if not earlier, and that makes it interesting. So the next stage is basically to try and get them dated. However, I'm waiting for some rich benefactor to give me some money. So that's where I stand at the moment. This is what I was doing last week, and I'm writing the report up this week. And hopefully, the people at Creswell Crags Trust will be very, very happy people when I give them the report. Because again, it's just another element to show the artistic endeavour of modern humans from the Upper Paleolithic, not just applying engraved rock art to a very, very cold landscape. It's the northern frontier of human existence in Paleolithic Europe, but also they are painting as well. So that's my story for the week.
Well, that is an amazing and awesome story, and I'm sure everyone is so excited and loved hearing about your updates. And it brings so many thoughts to mind that if we were going to talk about them all in this episode, would go way over time. But I just want to briefly mention, you're mentioning how people would just the stratigraphy and they throw everything around and they didn't know what they were doing. That brings to mind how now we can actually get DNA samples and proteomics from cave dirt and things like that, and how much of that has been lost because it hasn't been recorded and kept properly. And then there was something else that you mentioned. Going into caves and being able to see whether you can see the art from the entrance or not, or how far in you have to go. And we've talked about it before in the show, but how caves have different realms and they're intimate spaces where you have in the front where you have common activities where people would do things, and then you have the inner where they might do more secluded things. And then you have like almost sacred spaces that are deep inside the cave that perhaps only certain people were allowed to access, or we don't really know exactly, but there's definitely something going on with cave art where it's extremely hard to get to in certain aspects. Which, when we do get to that Rising Star episode, we'll definitely be talking about that for sure. Now,
yeah, absolutely, yes. Yeah.
Yes. So going on to our next story, which continuing on about caves, which is why I wanted to bring that up right now, is we actually have, for the first time, discovered in Saudi Arabia that modern humans, because this was the archaeological evidence only dates back to 7,000 years, so very recent, but habitation within a lava tube. Now, you might be thinking, oh, okay, well, whatever. Well, this is actually, as I mentioned, the first time we have found humans habitating a lava tube. And lava tubes are not just like any other cave system. They have their own ecology, they have their own environment, they have their own everything. It's a completely different ecosystem than you would find in, say, a large cavernous cave that has water in it or something like that. Lava tubes are, for those who might not know, exactly as the name explains. It is when magma is moving through the earth or when lava goes over the land and it just barrels through whatever, and it literally forms a tunnel of magma that once it cools, it's hollow and you can go through them. I've been in a few. They are eerie. They're eerie to say the least. Um, So the fact that we have found people living in one again in Saudi Arabia, which it was about 1.5 kilometers in length, it's actually the largest lava tube in Saudi. They discovered animal bones, stone tools, and pottery stretching from between 7 and 10,000 years ago. They and outside of the lava tube, in a nearby region, they found rock art with contemporary animals that they believe were created by the people who lived in the lava tube. So this whole environment was habitated lived on and contributed by these people. And we're only just beginning to learn how they survived within this environment that we haven't seen humans be in before, which is so exciting because, as we may know, modern humans have been everywhere. We only recently have been able to live in Antarctica, and only in a very extremely limited, mostly research basis. But we've conquered all landscapes, and to find one where we just now have found people is pretty awesome. Now, I wonder, because lava tubes, at least the ones I've been in, they're dark. They're darker than I feel. They're just dark. I don't know. Maybe because the walls are black as well versus a cave where the rock might be lighter. So I don't know if they're gonna find rock art in the magma on the walls. That'd be pretty cool. Different mode of, I don't know. Have we found? I assume there's rock art on. I can't think of the official name for dried magma right now.
There is, in fact, Seth. I mean, there's a really good example of rock art in a lava tube on Rapa Nui.
Okay, I was thinking something.
But that is fairly recent. I think it within, in terms of modern times, within the last 1,500 years.
Okay, wow, yeah. So it's a very rarely used mode of rock art, I would say. So this was a pretty cool story that came out, and it's just expanding what we know about human habitation, where we can live, what we can do with the resources that are at our disposal, and how we as modern humans are the species that we have the will to survive, and it seems so far we can do it anywhere. Where unfortunately to this planet we seem to kind of be cockroaches in some ways. So yeah, yay Earth Day! Every day should be Earth Day. Remember that. Okay, throwing that in there. And then I believe, George, you have another story that you wanted to talk about. So I will hand that over to you, and then I think that'll round us off for the day.
Yeah. This is one actually is the one which has been going around the world, in fact, over the last few months. It's a site which was actually looked at in 2021, and the one big melting pot that we have in Europe is Spain and Portugal, and some of the best research is coming from there as we speak. Not just with the discoveries, but also the science that's been used to work out what might be going on. And it's a site called Cova Dones, which is in Valencia, overlooking the Mediterranean. And again, the big claim there is that they found over 100 paintings, which are at least 24,000 years old. So it's Gravettian in date. And so the one thing you must look at, the one thing that doesn't actually come out in the news item is, what did the Mediterranean look like at 24,000? And what is really quite interesting is that it was a series of large lakes. And if you wanted to venture into the Mediterranean lake south of Valencia, you'll be wanting to be walking about 100 kilometers to get to that lake then. So obviously, the sea level has risen quite substantially over the last 24,000 years. And again, I draw your attention to a similar sort of interesting thing to think about is the famous cave of Cosca, which was looked at by my very good friend Jean Clot back in the 1990s. And Cosca or the entrance to Cosca cave is 30 meters below the current mean sea level of the Mediterranean. So you have to dive down basically to get to the main entrance of that cave. But 24,000 years ago, the sea level would have been between 50 and maybe 100 meters lower than it is today. So there would have been a landmass going right across most of the Mediterranean, and you would have these lakes called the Mediterranean. And so in 2021, they found this cave. The cave has been known about for quite some time. However, using new modern techniques and also eyes and this thing called the brain. A lot of archaeologists now are looking not just at the floor like we used to do, but also looking at the walls and the ceilings. And a colleague of ours, of myself and Genevieve's, a guy called Aitor Reyes Raimondo from the University of Zaragoza, he and a team went exploring in that cave with that view in mind that there could be rock art. Let's look for it. And they found over 100 paintings in there. I'm not sure if they were actually used de-stretch to highlight those images. I would hope they would have done. But the images included large fauna such as red deer, sort of stags, there were aurochs there, there was horses. So, quite an interesting sort of array of megafauna there. In total, 110 paintings and carvings, and also some flutings. And again, for those of you who do not know what flutings are, it's basically you get your fingers and you make your patterns or your paintings, or sorry, paintings, you make your patterns or your figures using your fingers into the cave clay. So the clay is used as a panel. Also, the other thing that they made the discovery of was that the floor of the cave was a red clay, and they're using the same red clay to paint on the walls. So basically, their materials were right beneath their feet. So again, that's an interesting point. Again, we tend not to think too much about that. And again, at one point in the near future, from another podcast, I'll tell you about feet and floor surfaces from another type of cave, but not artificial cave. That's another story. But anyway, this particular cave, very, very important. It's gone around the world. It was published. The story was published in Antiquity, and last year, and again, there's still more work to do there. And I dare say Aitor will be doing more work there, and to see what we've got. Now, the other thing they were using, and they use this very interesting term. I've never come across it before. But they used a German term called Mondmilch, which is basically moon milk or cave milk. And basically, this is a way of shading. So you've not just got just this single sort of outline of an animal or an animal covered in red pigment, applied pigment, that is, of course. But they've actually, the artist, he or she, has managed to shade in some form of shading to give it a three-dimensional look. And so they're using this moon milk or cave milk to highlight the curvature of the animal's body, which is again really unique. We only see it in places like, for example, the Drakensberg Mountains in South Africa, or Lascaux, or Chauvet, but very, very few other places that I know of. So it's quite remarkable. I do remember they say it's 24,000 years old, but it's more likely much, much earlier. So we're talking about gravettium between 22 and 33,000 years ago. So within that period, people are going in there and making these remarkable paintings on this wall. And again, what's really interesting, as typical, again, people have been going into that cave system, including archaeologists, but they've never looked at the walls to consider there might be rock art. And this is an interesting point, Seth, as you well know, because we're starting now to revisit a lot of these caves. I'm doing it. My colleagues at First Art are doing it. And lo and behold, guess what? We're finding it. So that's, just tells you the importance of making these reassessments. And I always had this point, and again, it's important. It's all about being honest in many respects, but never ever sort of stick to your guns about an initial interpretation about a cave or an archaeological site. Always think about the idea that you've got to update because the technology is being updated. Your mindset, the way you do things is changing as well. And so I think it's important when you are looking at these sites. Don't be too surprised that your ideas are going to change. And I'm pleased in many respects that caves like this Cova Dones, it was looked at, dismissed in terms of rock art. There's plenty of archaeology there, However, along comes Aitor and finds the rock art. So there we are. It just tells you just another element to add to the complexity of early modern humans. Right? That's us. That is my
Absolutely. And I think that is great advice and important advice that we need to keep in mind and a good place to leave off because, as George said, there is new technology being developed constantly. And every time that new technology every time that new technology is developed, we need to reevaluate what we know. When carbon dating gets its dates pushed back and is being able to be calibrated farther, guess what happens to all the carbon dated we have? It all needs to be recalibrated. This happens all the time, a lot more frequently than people like to think or admit. And there's so much work that needs to be done, and just people that aren't there to do it. So if you're interested in archaeology and carbon dating and wanting to be in this field, there is a lot of work to be done. And
Yeah.
with that, I just want to add this is episode 8 of season 2 of the Paleo Post podcast. I think it'd be a cool idea if for the season finale we announce the winner of that contest we mentioned at the beginning of this episode. And that'll be a nice way to end season 2 before the future of the podcast of season 3.
Yep. Points mean prizes.
Points mean prizes. And with that, my friends, we will let you go and enjoy the rest of your wonderful day. Remember, there is always more to learn, and we are here to share that with you. Have a great rest of your day, guys. Bye.